Level 1-6. Tor-Rez. Tor-Rez was a lifer, and one of the masterminds behind the Quiet Riot of '72. But in all honesty, to Nolan back then, he was more than that. In a lot of ways, Tor-Rez, though a fiend, was the only creature to help Nolan when he first became a turnkey. Having a psychotic breakdown your first day in Ogre Dungeon can leave a lasting, unwanted impression. In fact, every mistake you ever make in any dungeon can leave a lasting, unwanted impression because turnkeys never, ever forget. That is, unless you save everyone's life, of course, but long before Nolan had saved anyone, half the dungeon had called him Cupcake, and the other half wouldn't give him the time of day. Just, here's your keys and get to work, Cupcake. Oh, don't know what you're supposed to do? Oh, don't worry, we'll send a sergeant to chew your ass out as soon as you screw up, Cupcake. Nature of the beast. Nature of the dungeon. Nolan knew that now, but at the time, he hated every one of his fellow turnkeys and thought of them as nothing but beasts. Nothing but assholes. It would have meant the world to him if any of them would have offered him just a little guidance, a little kindness. But Nolan got nothing. Tor-Rez, well, he knew a turnkey's job better than most turnkeys. The only one who would offer Nolan any help was an orc, famous for beating up 3 chappies to death with their own cross. Tor-Rez knew every single turnkey job backwards and forwards. How could Tor-Rez know everything there was to know about turnkeys? Easy. He was stuck in the dungeon for the rest of his life. Years and years and years, locked away with nothing to do but go to rec, go to chow, and watch every single move every single turnkey ever made. And not a creature alive watched and studied turnkeys better than Tor-Rez. If ever Nolan had a question, he knew all he ever had to do was go down to his block and ask the orc in C-43 cell, and in one of the strangest twists of dungeon fate, Nolan slowly got better. All thanks to a murderous fiend. But then Nolan did something incredibly stupid. One of the stupidest things a turnkey could ever do. Something so dumb that he almost signed his own death warrant. He gave Tor-Rez a chocolate bar. A chocolate bar nearly killed Nolan. At the time, all he innocently wanted to do was show Tor-Rez his thanks. Tor-Rez had mentioned how he'd missed the taste of chocolate, so Nolan brought him in a chocolate bar from the outside, thinking nothing of it. Where was the harm? Well, Nolan may have learned a thing or two about turnkeys and dungeons, but he still hadn't a clue in his head about fiends. You never, ever give a fiend a chocolate bar. You never give them anything, especially something from the outside, because a fiend is not a regular creature like you and me. Reciprocity is not in their vocabulary. Or at least the good kind of reciprocity. If you ever do a single nice thing for a fiend, like maybe a free chocolate or a free copy of the Herald paper, they're not going to want to return the favor. They're going to try to shake more out of you. They'll push up on you every day after day until they can get all the chocolate bars, all the newspapers, and every single favor they can guilt out of you. You do something nice for them, and they'll think you're weak, a sucker, a sap. And with Tor-Rez's big dungeon break pending, only a mere month away, he thought he found the perfect sap on the perfect day to stage his coup. Tor-Rez knew the schedules of every single turnkey on Chapel Block. He knew every different day every turnkey worked every job. And he knew Nolan had to work the lever cage every other Thursday. The lever cage is a locked-up safe cage filled wall-to-wall with all the levers that open all the cages on the block. The only way in or out is with the key, and the turnkey inside the cage has the only key. Usually. But Tor-Rez had a copy of the key, given to him personally by the boss of bosses of the Bonefish Syndicate, Tor-Rez. How Tor-Rez ever got it in the first place, Tor-Rez would never know. The big bonefish boss never survived the riot, killed by none other than Sharperton himself. The riot failed because Tor-Rez was unable to pull a single lever. After he killed all 3 turnkeys on the block, slicing them to death, and even the block sergeant, Tor-Rez opened the lever cage door. He thanked Nolan again for the chocolate bar, and with homemade dagger in hand, leapt on the kid before Nolan could blow an emergency horn. Nolan sure did put up a good fight, all the while making every minute sweeter, begging over and over again for Tor-Rez to stop, please stop, even after Tor-Rez sliced his dagger across Nolan's face. Tor-Rez, no, please don't. As if such words would ever stop him, Tor-Rez the chappie killer. Tor-Rez loved to kill. And nothing marinated a kill more than the victim's screaming words like, please, and don't. But then something happened. Something that never occurred to Tor-Rez would ever happen, not in a million years. The victim's face, Nolan's face, was melting away before his very eyes. It was no longer the face of anyone that would ever beg. It was the face of someone just like him. Someone that didn't want to die. Someone ready to kill. Tor-Rez! Nolan screamed, rolling Tor-Rez off him, now as light as if Tor-Rez was a feather. It so startled Tor-Rez he lost all sense of the moment. This is not happening, his brain screamed. His escape had been in the works for nearly a year, and he refused to let it come to an end. Now, not when he was so close to seeing the sun again. He had to open the gates. He had to let everyone out in Chapel Block to go help everyone escaping from Alchemy Block. But before Tor-Rez could get back on his feet, Nolan was already beating him senseless with a broken stick until it broke in half. Nolan knocked the dagger out of Tor-Rez's hand. Tor-Rez reached for it, but in the struggle, Nolan snatched it and knew exactly where he wanted to put it. Inside Tor-Rez's right eye. Nolan went on to become a hero. He sounded the alarms, rallied all remaining turnkeys, and together they took back Alchemy Block. Tor-Rez spent 1 year in the box, 1 entire year, wondering how little Nolan could have ever bested him. It wasn't so much losing as much as it had been for Tor-Rez to lose to an elf that he considered to be nothing short of a joke, a pushover, a sap. He lost to someone who was supposed to freeze in a little ball, pee his little panties, and then let Tor-Rez stab him until his chest cavity looked like a sinkhole. Tor-Rez refused to let that slide. He would rather die than ever let that particular debt go unpaid. It took all but 1 day out of the box to find Nolan and try finishing what he had started to do. But this Nolan was even more different than the last he faced. This Nolan, this one had more than just a scar, but the very shadow of an abyss across his face. And Sergeant Nolan proved beyond the shadow of a doubt it was no fluke that Tor-Rez had lost. How? Nolan cursed from inside of the box. Another beatdown, another year, all alone, in the box, with nothing to think of about but revenging Nolan yet again. For Nolan, this became as consecutive as his birthday, or the winter solstice. There was the holidays, and then there was Tor-Rez Day. A holiday celebrated by an angry, aging orc attempting to cut his throat out like clockwork every single year. Every year but this one. According to Nolan's pocket calendar, Tor-Rez should have left the box 11 days ago, yet Nolan hadn't seen a trace of the one-eyed orc anywhere. He should have been happy, and at first he was, but as the days started to drag, something started to feel missing inside Nolan. Nolan felt abandoned that Tor-Rez had given up. Sad, even. He tried to ignore it, but the more he did, the worse it got. Nolan felt more alone than he had in his entire life, and for days, it was tearing him apart. Nolan could deal with beating up his only friend outside Olive Ogre Dungeon. All the constables of Jova hating him, all the people of his street hating him, never seeing Sephora again, never seeing Gino again, never getting to drop his guard again. He could deal with all that. He could deal with being alone the rest of his life. He could deal with no sleep, going crazy, and even Garland Macmillan. But for some reason, he couldn't handle the fact that Tor-Rez didn't want to play anymore. Nolan had been ignoring it for 11 days, but he couldn't know more. He was going to find Tor-Rez, and then, maybe then he could get a grip on things, show all of Ogre Dungeon he was as tough as he had ever been, and maybe, just maybe, finally get some sleep.